People who have a political agenda and don't care how much it damages society so long as their agenda is funded by the taxpayers. And gentlemen, the video I'm going to do at this time is what would happen if collectivist Dumocrats treated homosexuals, and I'm not going to use the word gay because that's not the correct word, it is homosexual. What would happen if collectivist Dumocrats treated homosexuals like they treat taxpayers? That means people who actually file a tax return and pay taxes, not people who get more money back than they paid in and have been doing that for generations. What would happen if they treated homosexuals like they treat taxpayers and law-abiding gun owners? I'm not talking about the gangbangers in Chicago who don't go through a background check and shoot each other. I'm talking about law-abiding gun owners. And let's just be honest, most of them are white. Ooh, that's not free speech, that's mean. Oh well. First thing, we're gonna go over a lot of stuff here. Try to get through this as quick as possible. One thing you'll notice, we'll go over the political agenda. We'll go over infection rates for HIV, AIDS, chlamydia, gonorrhea, syphilis, all that nasty stuff. And we'll go over figures estimating the percentage of the population that is so-called MSM, men who have sex with men. We'll go over all that stuff. One thing you'll notice is the southern U.S. is particularly hit hard with STDs, personal responsibility. You'll also notice that New York, California, and Illinois are usually pretty high on the list. And Washington, D.C., imagine that, usually leads the way in STDs. Washington, D.C. is so bad, I don't think even the cockroaches will stay there anymore. The first screenshot we're going to go over, first couple, those of you who are old enough, I'm not really old enough to remember this. I was really young. Out in California in the early 1980s, when the AIDS virus was discovered, but they didn't know what it was yet, and homosexual men were dying under mysterious circumstances, and they didn't know what it was. And finally they did figure it out. Well, Kathleen Sebelius, and this link wasn't available, but it has been archived. I made sure of that back in the day. She gave a speech commemorating 30 years of leadership in the fight against HIV/AIDS. Now, you would figure, and forgive me, I'll be clicking back and forth here between screenshots, and in addition, all the links are underneath the video, as per usual. Unlike a lot of progressive Dumocrats here on YouTube who put out all kinds of information and never reference it because it's not true. But anyways, she did mention Ryan White. That's amusing. That how can Kathleen Sebelius do a speech on the 30-year anniversary of the, what they call it, the leadership in the fight against HIV/AIDS, a disease that is largely preventable if you use a condom and don't have multiple sex partners, and maybe get to know someone more than 6 hours before you jump in bed with them. And I'm being a little facetious there, but how can you do a speech commemorating 30 years of the fight against AIDS and not mention homosexuals, not mention men who have sex with men? We're the only group since the 1990s who have a higher infection rate now than they did back then. And why do you think that is? Is it stupidity? I mean, if it's all genetic, then maybe there's a stupid gene in there that we need to find out about. And I need to mention this too. I would rather my free money go to my niece's college fund because they're going to make something of themselves. Now, some clown who's whacked out on heroin, shooting up, and having unprotected sex with numerous partners. In South Africa, AIDS is a heterosexual phenomenon. Here it's largely homosexual. But if you use your right to have promiscuous sex, and you do, and you get AIDS, I do not feel a bit sorry for you. If you get AIDS in utero or through a blood transfusion, then that's not your fault. And I will feel pity for you. But if you get it through promiscuous sex, which you have the right to do, I don't feel a bit sorry for you, and none of my money should go to you. Or you say they should just die? Well, if you can't find the money to pay for it from voluntary donors, yes. It's your own stupid choices. So if there's a lot of people out there, I don't know what the parents are doing. Are there any male role models here? Maybe telling people about this and all the money the government spends on it, trying to prevent it. I mean, I went over in one of my previous videos in a response to Old Brown Teeth. The NIH is spending gobs of money on this, and it's not doing any good. So I would rather my free money go to my nieces, not to somebody who was promiscuous and got AIDS. And as another thing you'll see as we go through this is a lot of people don't even know they have it, which means they're having multiple sex partners. But anyways, Kathleen Sebelius did a speech, the 30-year anniversary of the fight against AIDS, and didn't mention homosexuality. She has a political agenda. That would be like mentioning World War II and not talking about Stalin. You know, that's how ridiculous this is. And CDC fact sheet. Men who have sex with men, MSM of all races, continue to be the risk group most severely affected by HIV. Well, at least the CDC couldn't hide the truth. Kathleen Sebelius can in a speech, but the CDC can't. CDC's most recent data show that between 2006 and 2009, the number of new infections that occur each year increased among young MSM. Jeez. 48% increase among black MSM 13 to 29 years old. What are these people growing? What kind of life are these people growing up in? These data clearly show the urgent need to expand access, which means you're going to spend money, to proven HIV prevention programs for gay and bisexual men, and to develop new approaches to fight HIV in this population. As I wrote down there, a simple lesson in personal responsibility would suffice. This isn't rocket science, but if you have an IQ above room temperature, you should be able to figure out promiscuous sex with multiple partners and you don't know their history is not intelligent. But apparently people still can't figure that out. MSM account for nearly half of the approximately 1.2 million people living with HIV in the U.S. 49%. So they're about 5% of the population at the most, and they're half the infections. MSM account for more than half of all new HIV infections in the U.S. each year. 61% or an estimated 29,300 infections. While CDC estimates that only 4% of men in the U.S. are MSM, the rate of new HIV diagnoses among MSM in the U.S. is more than 44 times that of, and the word is heterosexual men. Truth hurts, I guess. Estimated new HIV infections in the U.S. 2009. The most affected subpopulations are white MSM and black MSM. And if you go by the percentage of the population that is white and black MSM are way ahead. It is, HIV is exploding in that community and it's destroying it. In a study of 21 major U.S. cities in 2008, MSM had high levels of HIV infection, and many of those infected with HIV did not know it, which explains why the infection rates continue to skyrocket. It's like these people, they pass it on to so many people before they figure out they have it, and then those people pass it on. It's like a self-perpetuating plague. Among those who were infected, nearly half, 44% were unaware of their HIV status. Ridiculous. Come on. And then this is another CDC's trying to make excuses. Social discrimination and cultural issues. I don't know if I would count myself as, I'm white, so I can't be discriminated. Well, I'm straight and white, so as far as Democrats are concerned, I can't be discriminated against. But just because you get talked down to by somebody or stigmatized because of a religious view or whatever, does that mean you go out and just ruin your life? I mean, what a bunch of babies. For some MSM, social and economic factors, including homophobia. So if you're not a fan of homosexual marriage, then that's homophobia. Well, okay. Stigma and lack of access to health care. I guess Obamacare is just not doing its job, is it? I mean, how much has HHS spending gone up since the 60s? Anyone want to look that up? Lack of access to health care may increase risk behaviors and be a barrier to reducing HIV prevention services. So if you don't have access to health care, that's just going to make you want to go out and have unprotected sex with multiple partners. It really makes sense. And then some MSM use alcohol and illegal drugs, contributing to increased risk for HIV infection and other STDs. Substance use can increase the risk for HIV transmission through risky sexual behaviors. That means anal intercourse. I hate to use a blunt term, but that's the risky sexual behavior they're talking about. While under the influence, and through sharing needles or other injection equipment. If you share needles, you're retarded. You are literally retarded if you share needles. I don't agree with drug use, but I believe that free people should have the right to put even really bad stuff in their body. But if you're doing that, I don't like cocaine and heroin, crystal meth, can't understand any use of that. But if you want to use it, I have no problem with that. I'm not your mother. But if you're sharing needles, retarded. So that does it for our first section. We're going to move into a few other things now. Estimating the population size of men who have sex with men in the United States to obtain HIV and syphilis rates. To make a long story short, estimates of the proportion of men who engaged in same-sex behavior differed by recall period. Past year equals 2.9%. Past 5 years equals 3.9%. And ever is 6.9%. Rates on all three disease metrics were much higher among MSM than among either men or women. Conclusions: estimating the population size for MSM allowed us to calculate rates for disease metrics and to develop rate ratios showing dramatically higher rates among MSM than among other men or women. And some journals, I think it was probably politically charged, tried to put the MSM population up around the 10% mark, and not even close. MSM accounted for 53% of estimated new HIV infections in the U.S. in 2006, and MSM, who also injected drugs, real smart, accounted for an additional 4% of estimated new infections. MSM accounted for 53% of estimated new HIV infections in the U.S. in 2006. So you see, this has been going through the stratosphere for a long time. While U.S. census data currently allow the Centers CDC to calculate disease rates by age, sex at birth, and racial ethnic groups, there are no census data for the number of MSM in the U.S. Estimation of a population size for MSM will allow for the calculation of disease rates among MSM to quantify the disparate impact of various diseases among MSM and to better guide allocation of prevention resources. I think parents are a good prevention, like the government, all this just say no crap and don't smoke. Yeah, but I think the parents are better at that rather than using my taxpayer money. Research by Kinsey and his colleagues led to the notion that approximately 10% of U.S. men are gay or bisexual. Later reviews lowered this estimate by approximately half, so that's not true. And if you, the 6.9% that recalled ever having homosexual sex, perhaps they turned away from it. I know from people say, "Oh, it's not a choice." No, it's a choice. People can and have shed the fetters of the homosexual lifestyle. So yeah, it's around 5% of the population. In their work, Lieb and his colleagues provide statewide estimates ranging from 3.3% in North Dakota, 13.2% in the District of Columbia, which might explain why their rates are so high, with an overall estimate that MSM were 6.4% of the male population. These estimates were derived using data from 2 national surveys that assessed whether men reported ever engaging in same-sex behavior. Lieb and his colleagues used their MSM population estimates to show that rates of HIV for MSM in 17 southern states were 36 times as high compared to other men in the South, with rates among MSM highest for African Americans in all states and lowest among white MSM in all but one state. So again, you can see the homosexual population, especially black MSM, have been hit hard by this disease, HIV especially. Estimated proportion of males who are MSM for individual studies and combined by meta-analysis by behavioral recall period, though ever, as there's a 6.9%, last 5 years is 3.9% of the recall period. And past year is 2.9%. So yeah, the people who are saying it was around 10% of the population are wrong. And here again, you've got MSM proportion is 4.4% in table 3 there. Again, I've got all the links under there. Estimated number, rate per 100,000 persons, and rate ratios for diagnoses of HIV infection in 2008. 37 states with confidential name-based HIV infection reporting for MSM, other men, women, and MSM by race, ethnicity, and age. So you can see MSM, the estimate rate per 100,000 population, 672. That's pretty high. And black, African American, you can see MSM, their infection rate is literally in the stratosphere. 2,165 per 100,000 population. That's sad. Let's see, that was HIV. This is syphilis. And again, MSM, the rate for them is much, much, much higher than straight men, other men, so-called other men. And black African American men are also hit really hard in syphilis diagnoses. This is 39 states. So we got a trend here, folks. We do have a trend. Estimated percentages and characteristics of men who have sex with men and use injection drugs. Of all new HIV infections in 2010, 80% were among men, of which 8% were among men who have sex with men. Why isn't the government? Well, the CDC's, you won't see the mainstream media is not going to report this. We'll also get into transgender infection rates, and that's another lifestyle that's very dangerous. CDC's new estimates show that there are about 20 million new infections in the U.S. each year. This is all STDs. 20 million new infections in the U.S. each year. This country is literally going in the toilet. This is the free love, free sex, and all that sleep around culture, which you have the right to do, but you don't have the right to my money to pay for your sinful proclivities. Costing the American healthcare system nearly $16 billion in direct medical costs alone. CDC's new data suggests that there are more than 110 million total sexually transmitted infections among men and women across the nation. That's about a third of the nation. Holy moly. $16 billion paying for idiots. If you get AIDS through promiscuous sex, you deserve none of my money. And that's not being selfish. You're the one that's selfish. At the end of here we go for the, this will demonstrate that the South has some issues. The following map shows the ranges of rates of persons living with a diagnosis of HIV infection at the end of 2008 by state. Predominantly states in the South, it's really bad in the South, report the highest rates. And then, of course, you got California, New York, and Illinois are also way up there. At the end of 2010, the South accounted for 45% of estimated 33,015 new AIDS diagnoses in the 50 states in the District of Columbia. Look at that map. That is sad. Estimating HIV prevalence and risk behaviors of transgender persons in the United States. Here's this will go over like a lead balloon. You're not going to see the media, the mainstream media will not report this. Meta-analytic findings indicated that 27.7%. This is MTF is male to female. 27.7% of MTFs tested positive for HIV infection, while 11.8% of MTFs self-reported being HIV seropositive. Higher HIV infection rates were found among African American MTF, that's male to female, and you can't change the chromosomes. You can't turn XY into XX or vice versa. It just doesn't happen, so this is all baloney anyway. Politically correct baloney. Higher HIV infection rates were found among African American MTFs regardless of assessment method. Large percentages of MTFs reported engaging in risky behaviors, unprotected, receptive anal intercourse, multiple casual partners, and sex work. Again, I think prostitution should be legal. I'm not going to engage in it, but if two people voluntarily say, you know what, I'm going to pay you X and we're going to go do Y, it doesn't affect me. Just keep it, don't be doing it on the street corner. And if you get AIDS or HIV, if you get HIV from that or something else, don't come crying to me. HIV among transgender people. More info from the excuse me, CDC, in 2013, a meta-analysis reported that the estimated HIV prevalence among transgender women was 22% in 5 high-income countries, including the United States. That's a pretty high rate, actually. Findings from a systematic review of 29 published studies showed that 28% of transgender women had HIV infection, while 12% of transgender women self-reported having HIV. This discrepancy suggests that many transgender women living with HIV, we've seen this before, don't know their HIV status. In the systematic review, black African American transgender women were most likely to be test HIV positive. Among the 3.3 million HIV testing events reported to CDC in 2013, the highest percentages of newly identified HIV positive persons were among transgender persons. And here's some prevention challenges. Your good old CDC giving you some advice. Individual behaviors alone do not count for the disparate HIV diagnoses among transgender people. Okay, so individual behaviors alone do not count, but then they say sexual behaviors and factors that may contribute to high risk of HIV infection among transgender people include receptive anal sex without a condom, that's an individual behavior, or medicines to prevent HIV, or high prevalence of HIV in sexual networks. That's probably a bad individual behavior. Sex with multiple partners, probably a bad individual behavior. And exchanging sex for drugs or money, probably not a good personal choice, but, that doesn't do it. That's other factors that contribute to high rates of HIV among transgender people include drug and alcohol abuse. And there's the good old war on drugs, too, that Obama likes. He's fighting the same war on drugs Reagan fought, and Nixon, and Bill Clinton, and Ted Kennedy. So we'll throw him in jail for just doing drugs and not hurting anybody else. So good job, Obama. Throw those transgender people in jail for using drugs. Among transgender people, other factors, drug and alcohol abuse, mental health disorders. Yeah, there's a lot of gray area there. I remember Stefan Molyneux asking the question, when someone is diagnosed with schizophrenia, what physical empirical tests do they do to verify the existence of schizophrenia? It's just behavioral observances. It's not actually anything empirical. It's bull. So that's baloney. Incarceration, drug war, thank you. Homelessness, a lot of people are homeless because they alienate their family, burn all those bridges. Unemployment, well, if we just spent more on welfare. We're not spending enough on welfare and 99 weeks of unemployment benefits. I guess it's not working. Lack of familial support. Okay. Transgenders, that's not really, if I had a transgender family member of mine, I admit I wouldn't hang around them. I'm sorry, just not going to do it. If they need financial help, provided they're not a drug abuser and an alcoholic, I might give it to them, but, violence, I don't know what that means. They're violent towards other people, or people are violent towards them, or other people in their community, in their little circle, or stigma, discrimination, limited health care access. How much has HHS spent? HHS spending increased since the 70s? Hello? And negative health care encounters, whatever the hell that means. Many transgender people face social rejection and marginalization. Well, Bill Maher did some things. He said some mean things about the Bible. Bill Maher's not a scholar. He's certainly not educated, but he said some bad things about the Bible, and I feel rejected and marginalized. Oh, get over yourself. Denial of educational employment. Do we spend enough on education? Employment and housing opportunities. Some transgender people who experience poverty rely on sex work to meet their basic survival needs. And the government should definitely throw people in jail for prostitution, too. Moving on. Some more information for you folks. Sexually transmitted disease surveillance 2014. More good news. During 1993 to 2011, the rate of reported chlamydial infection increased from 178, and I'll have the exact figures too, 178 to 453.4 cases per 100,000 population. During 2011 to 2013, the rate of reported cases decreased to 443.5 cases per 100,000. During 2013-2014, The national rate of reported cases increased 2.8% to 456.1 cases per 100,000. Then you've got the chlamydia rates of reported cases by sex. United States, 1994 through 2014, and you can see, it's up substantially since 1994. Then you've got it by state. As you can see, California, Illinois, New York are pretty high, surprisingly. D.C. leads the way, Washington, D.C., surprisingly, being facetious. And down south, there's a lot of problems with it. I don't know what's going on down there, but I wasn't no part of it. So you can see huge problems there. Certain areas are huge problem areas, other areas and not so much. One good thing about living in Iowa is we don't have a lot of that. So that all those diseases, they can stay in California and down south and in New York and Illinois and in D.C. They can have them there. Gonorrhea. In 2014, a total of 350,062 cases of gonorrhea were reported in the U.S., yielding a rate of 110.7 cases per 100,000 population. The rate increased 5.1% since 2013 and increased 10.5% since 2010. And in the 70s, gonorrhea was just running roughshod, and it's declined substantially since the 1970s high water mark. Still a problem, though, but not as much as it was back in the 70s. 70s was just a horrible decade. Stagflation and gonorrhea was running wild due to a high proportion of stupid people, I would wager. And there we go again. Surprisingly, California's near the top. Illinois, New York's not too close to the top that time. They're still in the top half. Not a surprise. D.C. again. Washington, D.C. again leads the way. What's the deal? We have a trend. And, of course, all over the South, it's a huge problem. Mississippi is... I don't know what's going on in Mississippi, but Mississippi is a toilet. If anybody could get out of Mississippi, I would. Terrible place. Gonorrhea rates of reported cases by race, ethnicity, again, blacks, have a rate that is just stratospheric compared to all other groups. I don't know what the deal is. There are some problems in the black community, and if the antique media would do its job and actually, instead of carrying the water for welfare programs and irresponsible carrying the water for, it's not my fault, it's somebody else's fault. No, you're stupid. If they'd quit carrying the water, if the antique media would do their job and sound the alarm on this, and we drop this political correctness, maybe this wouldn't happen. Or at least I shouldn't be paying for it. I think but I'm selfish if I don't want to give somebody subsidies. I guess it's my fault for being responsible. Maybe I just had really good parents. I don't know. Apparently there are a lot of people out there having kids that shouldn't. Syphilis. Total of almost 20,000 cases in 2014, yielding a rate of 6.3 cases per 100 population. This rate represents a 15.1% increase compared to 2013 and a 40% increase compared with 2010. Reported cases of P and S syphilis continue to be characterized by a high rate of HIV co-infection. There's another dirty little secret most people don't know about, particularly among, surprisingly, MSM. Among PNS syphilis cases with known HIV status in these states, 51.2%, that's a little over half for you Democrats listening, 51.2% of cases among MSM were HIV positive compared with 10.7% of cases among men who have sex with women and 5.9% of cases among women. So I have another problem there with the certain lifestyle. Again, blacks have been slammed by syphilis. This is a problem in their community. The rate of reported PNS syphilis cases remained highest among blacks. The rate among blacks was 5.4 times the rate among whites. And that's probably racist for saying that. Just can't say that. Syphilis reported cases by stage of infection. Primary and secondary is way down since the 40s. In fact, just overall, it's a total syphilis way down. It was that's a disease that we've kind of got a control on. It's, well, at least compared to what it was at one time. compare that with AIDS. When AIDS started ravaging the U.S., syphilis cases have gone way down. AIDS cases have not. So are we noticing? What's the difference? Well, people just aren't as responsible. So you can see syphilis not as big a problem. In fact, in the mid 80s to mid 90s, it had a little uptick too. But we haven't seen that with HIV. We haven't seen HIV in some communities is just as worse now than it was over 25 years ago. So, or 20 years ago. But I suppose that's bigoted for saying that too. Then you got PNS syphilis, primary and secondary syphilis. Again, men who have sex with men. The trajectory from 2007 to 2014 is going into the stratosphere. Not my fault. And then, oh, here we go again. Can you believe it? California is way up there, shockingly. Illinois actually is well, they're near the top quintile. Not shocking. New York is in the top quartile, I should say. And certain areas of the South are ravaged by syphilis again. Also, and not surprisingly, Washington, D.C. What is it with Washington, D.C.? Is there something in the water there? So deficit spending and piling debt on your grandchildren and children is not the only thing Washington, D.C. excels at. It also excels at passing STDs around. I think there's a lot of people in D.C. that do not have their heads screwed on straight. Chlamydia, rates of reported cases by race, ethnicity, and sex, 2014. I remember Stefan Molyneux going over murder statistics by group. Why is it that Asians are not nearly as afflicted by chlamydia as the black community? What's the deal? What's the difference here? What do you think the difference is? There's probably a lot more two-parent families in the Asian households. Probably a lot more blacks going to jail for drugs because Obama likes to fight the drug war, just like Reagan, just like Nixon, just like Clinton, just like that fat piece of crap, that drunk Ted Kennedy. So, but yeah, you can't say that. You're not going to see Katie Couric, Brian Williams, old Pinocchio won't be talking about that in the news. What's the deal here? We need to do something about this. I bet if HHS spent a couple $100 billion more educating idiots, we could solve the problem. No, the destruction of the nuclear family is a big part of the problem, and we're seeing it. Look at that. It's can't argue with the facts. You can be butthurt over them, but you can't argue with them. You can't change them just because you get butthurt. Gonorrhea, again, why is the level for Asians so much lower than blacks? Tell me, somebody tell me, if you actually got this far in the video. STDs, reported cases, and rates of reported cases per 100,000 in the U.S. 1941 to 2014. And we've already been all over this for the all stages of syphilis and chlamydia and all that, and the trajectories. Chlamydia since the 1990s has seen a massive uptick. Syphilis has actually seen a massive drop, as I said. Gonorrhea saw a massive drop, but it's kind of making a little bit of a comeback. I don't know whose fault that is, but I believe we're almost done. National Gay Men's HIV/AIDS Awareness Day, September 27, 2015. Is personal responsibility any part of this prevention equation? MSM represent approximately 2% of the U.S. population. According to this, it could be a little about double that, actually. However, in 2013, MSM accounted for 67% of all new HIV diagnoses, including 3% who are also injection drug users. So we got a part of the population that's around anywhere from 2 to 5%, and they're 2/3 of the new HIV diagnoses. What's going on, people? What's the deal? So I guess the truth hurts, and if the media would talk about this more, if they treated homosexuals like Democrats, if they treat homosexuals like they do gun owners, responsible gun owners like myself, who own assault weapons, and taxpayers who actually pay taxes and don't have a bunch of bastard children running around that you can't take care of, blaming somebody else for your own stupidity, If they treated those groups like they do Taxpayers and Gunowners, we would see something like the video I just did. They would get on TV and call people out. Call them out. But that's not going to happen because they have an agenda. Have a nice day, and don't thank me how for the information. And depending on which political camp you're in, you may be a little butthurt right now, but you'll get over it.